Hi, welcome to the first ever episode of Dr. T on Call. I'm Dr. Toya Turknat, also known as Dr. T, and I am so excited for you to be here with me as we start this podcast journey. So, if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that paging Dr. T is how Dr. T on Call originated. So, in 2018, I started paging Dr. T because I love to mentor. I am a board certified internal medicine physician, and it is not lost on me that as a Black female physician, I represent 2.8% of the US physician population. It's so important to me to make sure that other people coming after me who may look like me and have never seen a physician do something that they want to do, be able to have that opportunity by providing inspiration and providing mentorship to them. So, because of that, I expanded my one-to-one mentorship previously to a broader range of mentorship with paging Dr. T. However, over the years, so many wonderful things have happened in my life. I have completed medical school residency training and have been a practicing internal medicine physician for the past few years. The journey to becoming a physician, as well as practicing as a physician, has taught me so many lessons that I've learned from both the field of medicine as well as my patients that I've now translated into things that I have utilized and I continue to utilize on a daily basis in pursuing my overall life's purpose. And so that's what we're going to talk about on Dr. T on Call. We're going to discuss that journey to purpose and how the lessons I've learned along this way have influenced the person that I'm becoming and hopefully help to provide some inspiration and guidance for you as well. So before we start all of our discussion, let's start from the beginning so you get an understanding of who you're actually talking to. So long before there was Dr. T, there was Toya Turknat from Augusta, Georgia, born and raised. Both of my parents are from Texas, but they moved to Augusta early in the 80s to start their career as engineers. I am the middle of three sisters. And we've always been taught from a very young age, if you are a Turknet, there are two things that are promised to you. You're going to be tall and you're going to be smart. So academics are always a big push in our family. In regard to becoming a physician, the first time I became very clear that I was going to be a doctor was actually when I was 4 years old, which interestingly, if you talk to a lot of people who are physicians now, they will say around 4 or 5 years old is the first time that they decided that they were going to be doctors. I was 4 years old and I was watching TV with my dad, and we saw Dr. Jocelyn Elders. At the time, she was the U.S. Surgeon General. It was a commercial, if I remember correctly, don't quote me on this, but I think the commercial was about smoking and the dangers of smoking. And I remember I asked my dad, who is this? And my dad said, that's Dr. Jocelyn Elders. She's a doctor. And there was a moment of just looking at this woman who looked like me and saying, I can do that. And I remember from that moment on, I knew I was going to be a doctor. And that moment of seeing somebody who looks like me, that moment of representation ended up having a 20+ year effect on me before I was called Dr. Turknat. And it meant so much because the next time I saw a Black female physician, and the first time I saw a Black female physician in person, I was 22 years old. So, like I said, growing up, academics were always huge in our family. So throughout my grade school, all the way to high school years, was always highly academically competitive in a school that was actually very academically competitive. We won't go through every year because that's a lot of years of schooling. However, there are some things that I would love to highlight about my time through elementary to high school. Singing was always my first love. I used to sing in every choir that was available in elementary and middle school. And then when I reached high school, I actually started singing in show choir and also singing competitively in our different choirs. So if you ever watched the show Glee with the soloist, yeah, that was me every year. I really, really loved it. And then in addition to that, some other fun notes. When I was in middle school, I was actually voted by the student body, and I was the first Black female student body president of Riverside Middle School in Evans, Georgia, which was actually a pretty big deal because the demographic of my middle school was about 90% Caucasian. It was very interesting. But I've always been the person who nobody would call popular. However, I always got along with everybody. And so that was kind of still the same thing that pushed me to that first level of success. Also, if you want to know the type of person you're talking to, I've always been a person who is a defender of all. So my platform that I ran on for student body president was vote for me because I said so. And my ideology of my platform was that I was very concerned about the levels of the cliquishness of middle school amongst the different friend groups. And I really wanted to create an environment where our middle school felt inclusive to all so that we all could thrive. Which, looking back, I think that it was very advanced for a 13-year-old, but it ended up being my platform, what I ran on, and actually was able to create some pretty cool changes for the middle school. So, like I said, then going to high school, continue to sing, travel across the country with our different choirs and groups. I was even, in addition to show choir, in a barbershop quartet, which we performed well and did very well competitively. And then it became time to start looking at colleges. So I am a second generation HBCU graduate. Both of my parents are first generation college graduates on both sides of their family. And my parents met at Prairie View A&M when they were both obtaining their engineering degrees. So for me, HBCUs have always been, or historically Black colleges and universities, have always been deeply ingrained in me, and I always knew that I wanted to attend an HBCU for college. However, I did not know which one I wanted to go to. My oldest sister, she started college at Spelman College. However, I was not interested in going to an all-female college. I wanted to go somewhere that was a prestigious HBCU. However, I did not see myself in a large metropolis because I personally felt like coming from Augusta, going to a large city would probably provide a little more confusion for me than solutions. And so I actually had never heard about Hampton University until a college fair my sophomore year of high school, and found out about Hampton University at that college fair. And I also found out that with my grades and SAT scores, I would qualify for a full ride presidential academic scholarship. So I knew without a shadow of a doubt that Hampton University was the place I wanted to go, which is interesting because I had never seen the campus. However, my senior year, when I did go on the actual tour of the university, I fell in love with Hampton University from the moment we drove onto the campus. I then ended up going to Hampton University for my undergraduate degree. I started out as a biology major and then actually transitioned to a biochemistry major after my first year of college. Interestingly, I am actually also one of the first class of graduating biochemistry majors from Hampton University. The major opened my sophomore year of college, which is why I changed my major. And loved my time at Hampton University. There is nothing like the HBCU experience, especially during some of the most formative years of your life. That college time frame is the first time in most of our lives where we are making the decisions for ourselves as far as who we want to be, who we want to be around. And also, we're figuring out who we are. And so it was beautiful to be in a place that was so supportive of my experience as a student and as a developing adult. So now we're at our junior year of college and we're starting to try to decide what are we going to do after this? Now, like I said, I have only had one goal since I was 4 years old. I was going to be a doctor. I was going to be a physician. And now I'm a junior in college, and I finally realized something that's very important. I have no idea how to become a doctor. I have no idea how to get into medical school. I don't have any family members who are doctors. And now I've bitten off this goal that is way more than I can chew. And the reality hit me so hard because I went to a career fair with my friends in the second semester of our junior year. And we went to a MCAT prep station, and they gave us a little card that said, "These are the things that you should be doing every year of college to prepare you for your med school application process." And I looked at that card and I realized that I had not done any of those things. The only things I had done in college was make good grades and taken the science classes that automatically gave me medical school prerequisites. And so this began a 3-year long journey that I love to share now because I'm so happy to be able to share it because there are so many people who want to pursue this path of becoming a physician and may not know all of the steps to getting here. And I want you to know that even if that is your case, you can definitely do it. You can definitely make it and learn from my mistakes so that your path will be easier than mine. If you look at a GPS and you put in an address for somewhere, and sometimes our GPS will show us the direct route to get there, and then sometimes the secondary route will say the direct route is 1 hour. The secondary route is 3 hours, and you take tolls. You go through a hill and a bush, and you might get stopped on a ferry. When I look at my medical school journey or my journey to getting into medical school, I feel like I always took that second route, that I went the hardest way humanly possible and stumbled my way into medical school acceptance. And so I want you to learn from that so that when your time comes, you are able to streamline this so much more. And when I look back, because now, of course, I can see everything through 2020 vision. When I look back, the two things that I can say is that there was no problem with my intelligence or my ability to get into medical school. I was underprepared and I was under-mentored. And those two pieces played a huge role into why it took me so long to get into medical school. So let's talk about it. So first, I did graduate from Hampton University with my Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry in 2012. I took my MCAT in the worst way known to man. I bought my MCAT books for like $45, studied for approximately 3.5 weeks, and made a very borderline MCAT score. Somehow, that plus my grades actually did afford me a interview for medical school the first time. However, I was waitlisted and then ultimately a spot did not open. But during that first interview season, I interviewed at Morehouse School of Medicine. And I had an interviewer honestly tell me that I seemed like I could possibly be good. However, everything was so borderline. Who knew if I was going to be a great candidate for medical school? And so my interviewer asked me, "What would you do if you don't get into medical school this application season?" And so I said, "Well, I guess I would apply again next year." And so then she said, "Okay, well, what would you do if you don't get accepted in your second year applying?" Well, I've never thought in that far, right? I'm 21 years old. I'm assuming that medical school is just like every other school I've applied to. I'll just get in. So I never thought about if I didn't get in a second time. And so I said, well, maybe I should give up because maybe being a doctor is not for me. And my interviewer said, no, you will do a Master's of Science in Medical Science program. You will obtain a 4.0 GPA, which will make your science GPA highly competitive instead of borderline competitive. And you will improve your MCAT score, which will push your application over into the highly competitive range. And then you'll get into medical school. That conversation, though I had no other mentorship in the entire time that I was trying to become a physician, that conversation is what got me into medical school. Because I took that interviewer's advice. And after I was waitlisted the first year, I came back and I applied the second year. And I will say once again, underprepared. I thought that because my first application was great, I would just submit the exact same medical school application. And if there is a lesson to take from my story, please understand this. It is important for you to always be growing, to always be improving. I went through again and I went through the interview cycle. And then shortly after, my application was denied. So I called the admissions office and I asked, what was the reason that my application was denied for medical school? And they said, because you sent in the exact same application as the year before. So your application shows that in 365 days, you did nothing different, which was not even true. I had done a lot. I had been mentoring, I had been shadowing, I had become a chemistry tutor for multiple college and high school students. I created my own chemistry course to teach chemistry. But I thought that it wasn't important for people to know that I was growing. And that was one of the biggest lessons of my life. You always should be growing, and you always should have something to show for that growth. But I took that interviewer's advice from my first round of interviews, and I applied to a Master's of Science in Medical Science program. I was accepted into that program and started in August of 2013. I obtained a 4.0 GPA from that program. I increased my MCAT score in that program, and I reapplied to medical school for the third time. And I was accepted into medical school shortly thereafter. And so in 2014, I started my medical school journey. And I want to note this because it's important. And sometimes I forget because I'm so far removed from this journey. But there were so many people along the way who told me that my dreams are too big. There were so many people along the way who told me that they didn't know if I would be able to be a physician or withstand the rigor of the academia needed to become a doctor and actually get through medical school. I had an assortment of admissions committees tell me that they did not think that I could become a physician. And it's so interesting now because I don't even think about them when I tell my story. But I want to note it because it's important for you to know that there will always be people along the way who were not born with the vision that you were given. And with all of the things in front of them, they will not be able to see what is placed inside of you. And I want to note that because I also want to note when I got to medical school, I was studying all the time, 12 to 16 hours a day for 3.5 years of medical school. But I did exceptionally well in medical school. Exceptionally well. in medical school. All I needed was one person who could see my potential. I needed one person who could see my potential and also walk the path I needed to walk. And that person was my interviewer on my first round of interviews. I go into medical school. The next 4 years are full of as many academic challenges as you expect to have in medical school. It took a lot of work, a lot of effort. Like I said, 12 to 16 hour study days, at least 6 days a week. That was my life. I spent many a birthday studying my heart away. And then all of a sudden, we're nearing the end of medical school, and now I'm trying to decide about residency. So the interesting thing was that I always knew I wanted to be a doctor since I was 4 years old, but I didn't know what type of doctor I wanted to be. For a long time, I thought I wanted to be a pediatrician. Part of my story in childhood was that I was an ill child. And I almost actually failed my 3rd grade year just because of the number of days I missed because of illness. Academics were completely fine. I actually got into the talented and gifted program in that same year. But I saw a lot of doctors during that time. And I remember saying, I think I could do this better. I think I could communicate better. And so I wanted to be a pediatrician. And I love kids. I love working with children. I think that children are the greatest gifts on this planet. If you ever want true honesty, ask a kid the answer to the question you have. But then I realized I like working with everybody. So later on, I thought I was going to be a family medicine physician. And then when I actually got into medical school, this was my first time even hearing about the internal medicine specialty. And then my 3rd year of medical school, when we actually start working on clerkships or working in the hospital, I fell in love with the specialty of internal medicine. You get to see everything, and every field of medicine has its own culture. For internal medicine, I always still, and I can describe it and I can say this because I am an internist. I call internal medicine physicians, we are personable nerds. We will talk to you and we can crack jokes with you, but our brains are moving a million miles a minute at all times. And I love that. I love the amount of thought that was taken into every action that I saw internal medicine doctors do. But if you talk to them, it just seems like they're just having a good conversation with you. And so I fell in love with the field of internal medicine. And I also love that there were so many specialties that start with the foundation of internal medicine. If you've ever had a cardiologist or a pulmonologist or a nephrologist, that's a heart doctor or a lung doctor or a kidney doctor, before they became those specialists, they started and completed internal medicine residency as well. So I loved it. I knew I wanted to, by the time we're in our 4th year of medical school and I'm applying for residency, I know I want to be an internal medicine doctor. And then you have to go through the application process for residency. And I remember having all of those terrifying feelings again that what's going to happen? Am I going to get into a program? And thankfully, I went and talked to some of my professors who made light of my amount of trepidation, which actually was very helpful because they said, Toya, we've seen your scores. We've seen what you've done in medical school. You'll be fine. And I ended up having a really great residency application cycle. I was invited to interview at some really great institutions. And ultimately, I ended up going to residency and completing residency from one of the best hospitals in the world. And in 2021, I graduated from residency. And if you're counting the years, yes, I was an internal medicine resident. I was actually in the middle of my second year of internal medicine residency when the COVID pandemic hit, which was, I don't even have the word to discuss how difficult that was. When I'm already in residency, already in a high intensity, high stress training environment, and then the world goes into a pandemic that we're learning on our feet every, literally every day, new information. It was a life-changing experience. But somehow in that, my love for medicine grew even further. And so I completed residency in 2021. I became a board certified internal medicine physician as well at the end of 2021. And I moved back to Atlanta. I did my residency in Arizona, and I moved back to Atlanta and began practicing for a couple of years in Atlanta. And I loved being back in the South. I loved being back in Georgia. However, I was offered the opportunity to come back to my training institution. And so I came back to Arizona, and I'm here now practicing medicine as an internal medicine hospitalist. As a hospitalist physician, I work with patients solely in the hospital setting. So I do not have a clinic, but I absolutely love my job because it allows me to be so cerebral and also help people during the most emergent times of their lives. I love being an internal medicine physician. I love practicing. I love the interactions I get to have with my patients. There's something that is so special about being the main point of contact for a person who maybe 15 minutes before was a complete stranger to you, but now you're helping them through one of the toughest moments of their lives. I do not take it lightly, the job or the position that I do. You will often hear me refer to this podcast or our time together as a journey. And that is because that is how I view life. We're not worrying as much about our destination as we are about every single step that it takes to get there. I am so grateful to you for being here with me on this journey. But I also feel that it's my responsibility to make sure that as we go along, we're putting all the things in our backpacks that we need. So for today's journey, I want to leave you with a couple of things to think about. I want you first to think about your goal. Think about that thing that you really want that feels like it's outside of your actual ability. Then I want you to ask yourself, has anybody ever done it before? Or are there people who may have done bits and pieces of it that I can put together to say, this is what I really want to do? Second, I want you to be better than me. So as we go along this journey, I want you to have a map. The reason why, when I talked about that GPS, I took the long route was because all I knew was where I was and I knew what I wanted my final destination to be. I never took the time to actually map out the journey. So, what I want for you is I want you to map out how you'll get from point A, where you are now, to point B, to where you'll go. There may be some aspects that feel like they're outside of your grasp. We're not worrying right now about how all these pieces will come together. I want you to think about the journey. I want you to think about what steps need to be taken for you to get from point A to point B. It's important because when you can see the map, you understand that it's doable. So do the work. Go back and look at what you want to do. Figure out where you are and figure out where you want to be, and then draw that map every step along the way. Hey, I want to be a doctor. I'm in high school. Or I want to become a baker and own my own store. And right now, I bake cakes at home. How do I get from point A to point B? And I'm going to draw that out. I'm not going to ask myself where the money's going to come from. I'm not going to ask myself where I'm going to get all the means. I'm going to draw the map. And lastly, like I told you in the beginning, the two things that played huge pieces into why it took me so long to become a physician, I was underprepared and I was under-mentored. Mentorship is the most invaluable piece of success that I could ever recommend for you. In whatever field that you want to go into, I want you to find and seek mentorship. It is so important because there are things that you think are impossible that you just need somebody who's already done it to show you how to get to it. You can save yourself years of headache by having proper mentorship. So thank you. Thank you for being here with me. Thank you for sharing this first ever episode of Dr. T on Call. I am so excited about where we're going to go. And I'm so excited about not only telling my story to you, but also hearing your stories. So make sure you like, you subscribe, and you comment. And also follow Paging Dr. T on Instagram, on TikTok, on YouTube, on Facebook, because we're building a community. And I'm so excited about you being a part of it. All right, I'll talk to you later. Have a good one.
Man.